Today I'm joined by Simon Davis, who is a thought mover, corporate real estate and workplace technologist, and startup accelerator. Simon is also the Senior Vice President of Workplace at Impact Group, as well as the founder of Purposeful Intent, the education chair of the Cornet Global Arizona chapter, a board member of the Scottsdale Paradise Valley YMCA, and the IFMA SAG advisor and event coordinator for the information technology community. So Simon, welcome to the podcast today. You know, 2021 has been a very challenging year for people, for companies, a lot of things up in the air. So I thought today, instead of living in the past, let's look at 2022 and talk about things we're both, I think, hearing and seeing technology-wise and around facilities. And so I'm curious, Simon, what are some of the technologies you think are going to become maybe more prominent in 2022 or leveraged more as we go forward in the workplace?
Yeah, I'd say firstly excited to talk about the future. I think there's been a lot of column inches given to talking about, return to office and post-COVID workplaces. And I think we need to start thinking in a much bigger and wider lens of, what does the workplace look like going forwards, right? Regardless of what we've been through. Because what we've certainly seen is globally a sea change in how people perceive the office, right? I think the power has changed. I think what's always been a very transactional activity between landlords, brokers and owners is now becoming much more of an emphasis on the people actually using the asset, i.e. the employees of the space. And I think that's going to be the biggest change that's going to come out long-term from the pandemic, right? People now feel empowered in order to go back to their bosses and say, you know what, you told me for years I couldn't work from home. Well, we just proved to you that for a year and a half we could. And yeah, it's not perfect, it's not ideal. And I don't ever believe that a remote only strategy is the right one, because you do miss out on cultural aspects and other aspects as well. But I think where we're seeing things change going forwards is that power the employee will have in order to help better manage his or her own day and own life, which I can only applaud, frankly. Being a father and a husband and having other commitments, being more flexible and being more hybrid are two things that I'm fully embracing.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely, some very good points there, because we're also seeing, I think, more just adaptability needing to take place. And something that you recently wrote about that I would love to hear your thoughts on then are the difference between, we talk about remote work versus hybrid versus in office. How about speaking to those points a little bit?
Yeah, I think, that it's funny, a lot of the original discussion points online were very binary about, always in the office and always out. And the reality is the best situation for most people is a combination, which would be hybrid. The way that I try and simplistically look at it is really sort of as two sort of alternating ends of the scale. One is those companies that are office first. So predominantly they want you in the office. So companies like Netflix and Goldman Sachs, where they've really said, look, we want everybody back for whatever reason, right? For Netflix, I think it's more because it is an area and a hub of innovation, and there's a real desire for people to be in the space. Goldman's, I think it is more just traditionally how they manage their people, right? Managed by site, you have to be here, and you have to be here because we're going to, teach you everything you need to learn very quickly. You're going to make a lot of money, and then you're going to go off and do whatever else. At the other end of the spectrum, you look at companies like Slack and Dropbox, Shopify, that are remote first, right? Where the predominance of your work is going to be done outside of a physical office space. And everything in between I put as hybrid, right? So, for me, if you're in the office 4 days a week, but you're home 1 day a week, or you're working from a third place 1 day a week, then it's a hybrid environment. It's just less of an emphasis on sort of the hybrid nature. And I think, frankly, that the simplistic way of looking at it also works, because in my mind, what makes people happy is flexibility and choice, right? The ability to determine themselves when and where they work based upon what they're trying to achieve, right? You look at things from the perspective of times, right? 9 to 5 in an office has always been very arbitrary, in my opinion. I myself, typically what I'll do is I'll get up at between 5:45. I'll do an hour or so in the morning of work. I'll post things on LinkedIn very often at that time of day. Then when I'm home, I'll take my daughter to school, come back, get working again, sometime in the day I'll take a break. I might watch a show, or I might, work out at my in-home gym, and then pick up my daughter, or do work in the afternoon. But having that flexibility in order to be able to get things done as I see fit, you know, certainly it empowers me, it motivates me, and I think it energizes me to do things at the right time. Whereas I think if I was back to the days of shoehorning something into arbitrary hours, it becomes more of a drag, right? If you want a mental, physical break, you should be able to take one in my view, and a hybrid enables that, and sort of flexible working hours enables that as well.
I think the people that are in the workforce are certainly a huge driver in making all that happen and challenged to maybe adapt themselves some. But these are also big challenges for corporations, for the C-suite, because it used to be, hey, we have a company policy, here's the way it is. And now you're finding yourself from a C-suite and pushing down to your managers and your line supervisors that we've got to be a little more flexible and we have to be adaptable to these things. And I think there's a lot of learning challenges. And from speaking to some people in the C-suite recently about this topic, they're finding themselves like, wow, we've got to like rethink our entire HR policy structure even. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I mean, frankly, the easiest decision for any corporation is to do nothing and try and maintain the status quo, because moving companies from whatever traditional environment they had to a hybrid work model is a challenge, right? There are cultural changes, there are change management issues, there are physical aspects within the workplace, certainly HR policies. If you think about even things like if you're allowing people to work remotely on a more permanent basis, what are the tax implications? It's a lot of brain work, and an easy decision for organizations would be, we're just going to bring everybody back the way they were. Now, where the pushback is coming and will continue to come on that is people will leave. People have that sort of more empowered view, I think, to look for other alternatives and other positions. And with companies that are flexible, we've really, I think, for many, many years, been constrained by our geography, right? That you really only look at jobs. I'm in Arizona. And pre-pandemic, I probably would have only looked at jobs, that had some kind of connectivity to Arizona, or more likely people recruiting. I work for a company now headquartered out of San Francisco. I do not believe pre-pandemic they would have recruited me to be based in Arizona full time, because people just didn't believe it would work. And I think now, because you have that power of choice, companies that are going to be inflexible and decide on the short-term easy route of saying let's just get back to normal, long term are gonna lose out, because they're gonna lose their talent, they're gonna use their people, and I think that's the biggest changing dynamic we're gonna see, is really the impact on attrition to organizations. And I think we're gonna see changing metrics. I think people should start looking at ratios of real estate cost to attrition. Something I've mentioned several times in other discussions with people. I live in Phoenix. An average desk here, let's say, certainly a few years ago, was between $6,000 and $7,000 a year in terms of cost, right? If I have a $200,000 a year developer who wants to maybe come in 1 or 2 days a week, or even 1 or 2 days a month, am I going to keep a $6,000 a year asset just in case, or risk losing that person? My response would be, I'll keep it, right? Because I don't want to have to go through the cost of the cost and the pain of replacing that person. And I think those companies that are looking short-sightedly at what's the easiest perceived option now of going back to the status quo, long-term are going to really, really miss out, because they're going to start losing their most talented people.
And there's ramifications along economic lines around states and cities too, because one of the things, I live in Tampa Bay, and our area is exploding in growth right now, because a lot of people that aren't in the office on a regular basis or strictly remote, we have a huge influx of people moving here, and
Right.
it's driving prices up like crazy. The housing market here is unbelievable. They've said the housing market here now has passed Austin in terms of cost, which, Austin's always been an area that's fast growing, and housing costs have increased enormously. And so we're seeing a lot of pressure even on this area, but it's at the cost of other cities. Even entire companies are even picking up and moving headquarters to somewhere like the Tampa Bay region. And it's changing the commercial real estate market in general, I think. You can't
Yeah.
open commercial space in Tampa fast enough. In other cities, what are you going to do? That they're losing commercial space, or they're having more available, I should say. So there's a lot of challenges in the commercial real estate market, I think.
Yeah, I think across the globe in terms of just not just commercial but all the tangential things, right? Look at the impacts it's having on restaurants and retail, right? A lot of the call, frankly, for people to get back into the office is because of how economies are suffering. But I think also I'm seeing if you look at data, if you look at the data, right, and the problem is too many people are looking at they'll pick out one piece of data and they'll throw in a headline. I mean, I saw something the other day about the Toronto office market bouncing back because of uptake. And if you look at the actual numbers, it's way below what it was. And then you look at the numbers of actually, people coming into some of those cities and they're considerably lower. And then on the other take, you look at like certain cities where there is more foot traffic and there's more people. I don't believe that's driven by people that are coming back to the office. I believe it's driven by people that want to have the experience of being in a city, right? There was one of the sort of the many investment bankers recently made the comment that if you can come into the city to go to a restaurant, you can come in and go to the office. Well, no, because coming to go to a restaurant in the city is fun. I'm going to get a good meal. I'm going to see my friends. And I think if people really want to drive employees back to the office, which again, I see there is certain great benefits when it comes to celebrating, collaborating, and being with people, they need to make it appealing, right? And making it appealing isn't offering free coffee and amenities. It's offering an environment that you want to be in, right? And I had a moment this morning on a phone call with a gentleman in Paris talking about a product that he's built around hybrid, which is absolutely phenomenal. And it made me realize that what's going to bring people back into the office? Other people. That's what they want. They want to be around people, right? So if there's a communal joint purpose and effort to be in the space because there's a value to it, that's what will bring your people back. It's data will help, right? So if you think about things like workplace experience apps or tools to help with scheduling when you should actually be in the space or understanding visibly and easily somebody else's schedule, those things will help enable that. But there has to be, as I've used the phrase a lot, there has to be purposeful intent to actually put your pants on, get up and leave the house. So.
Yeah, and I think the another thing that's interesting about that is to your point, is I think some people though that thought, hey, I'm never going to go back in an office. I love being remote. That's all I want to do. I've heard a lot of people that have kind of like, actually, I wouldn't mind being in the office 2 or 3 days a week because that home life is being impacted by work more than ever now. I don't have a separation. And I think
Right.
I know myself, I'm terrible at that. I'm not a very good disciplinarian about separating work and home. But I think there's a lot of people who miss the culture. They miss the water cooler
Yeah.
conversations and still want that, right?
No, absolutely, and that's why I say. I mean, there are companies that are going remote only, right? And I see the value of that, right? If you're a startup, frankly, one of your biggest overheads that you don't necessarily need is real estate, right? So if I'm at a scale, I'm 150 to 300 employees, do I really need a physical office? Maybe I use a third space like a WeWork or something of that nature, but do I need a physical space? But I think on the larger macro level, people absolutely want that human connectivity. There is that benefit of being in the office, but it has to be used in the right way. And I think to get people back, the draw has to be there, right? You and I, before we started recording, Tracy, we were talking about conferences. For me, one of the best things about the conferences was not only sort of celebrating moments with people we haven't seen and collaborating with friends, but it is those casual collisions. It's being sat at lunch with somebody who you've just met, who introduced you to somebody else, and you're suddenly, wow, we have a real mutual interest in X here, right? Same absolutely applies from the office perspective. I think there's going to be a danger, and I'm seeing it right now with people that are going back too quickly. The early adopters of return, the people that really want to be in the office, in my mind, are the people that are having the worst experience of being back in the office because they're not getting those things, right? They go into the office, they have to wear a mask. There's a partition between them and their roommate or their colleague. There's no sort of free snacks. There's no casual collision because you're maintaining a social distance, right? And those early adopters are the people easiest to pull back in. So I think if you take that further down the line, you have to be very, very careful. The people that right now are sitting at home saying, I never want to go back, you have to make sure that the value and the purpose is there to bring them back at the right times. And I think that's going to be a challenge. I really do. As with everything, right? The people that are most likely to adopt it, if they're not enjoying their experience, which I hear from a lot of workplace leads, they're not, then, you've really got to rethink. And I think companies like Google just announcing they're going to push back the return makes perfect sense, right? Why push it when there's no necessarily perceived value to doing it. If my experience is going to be worse, having to commute, having to, go into the office, having to sort of prove vaccination status, wear a mask, etc., then why push people back to that just for the sake of them physically being in a space where there's really no material benefit?
Yeah, and I think then there are ramifications that companies need to think about from a technology standpoint as well. If I'm going to have people who are either remote or a hybrid model, I'm probably going to need to make sure I'm budgeting for equipment to make sure they have a correct home office. I know from personally, I make sure that people had laptops, they had a quality camera, they had what they needed. They had a second monitor, maybe even a third if they needed it to do their jobs right. So I think that's changing and impacting that whole budget process. And even then you run into the technical support side of that. There's a lot of ramifications on the technology side. What are you seeing something like that?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I don't think I can name the company, but I do know of one company that what they've done is they've decided to do early termination on several of their leases, and they're taking the money they're saving, putting that into pools of funds for employees to improve the equipment. And I think it's a big thing, right? We're very fortunate where we are, knowing you well, Tracy, we both have space where we can actually have a physical office. I have a whole room here. I have a big screen behind me. I have my Kyler Murray jersey up on the wall, etc. Right? I have a great environment where I love working. It'd be hard to pull me out of the office, but if you don't have those capabilities, either because of maybe where you are in your career. I mean, I used to live in London. I shared a house with 7 guys, and that would not have been a conducive place to ever work from home, right? I was chatting with a friend yesterday who happened to also be in Paris, and he was saying that a lot of the people that are living in sort of smaller one-bedroom apartments want to be back in the office, right? So you might not have that capability to work, but I think the big piece from the technology drive for me, and something we're spending a lot of time looking at right now, is those technologies that enable me to be inclusive in discussions, regardless of where I work, right? I'm doing a panel later, and one of the gentlemen, he runs real estate technology for Fidelity. And he has this great phrase, which is, from a tech perspective, we need to meet our employees where they are, right? So whether that be, coming into the office and having a great experience when you check in and book a space, or whether that be working remotely and having great technology to ensure that works well, I think people need to consider both of those aspects. Budgetary, absolutely, it's something companies are going to have to consider, whether you lay off against your potentially reduced real estate costs, or you just take that as another metric to go against your attrition. There are ways to justify that for sure.
I think even the ability in some cases to subsidize even internet speeds and all, because those are things, as you pointed out, people are at different points in their career, and they have maybe someone young. I don't know how anybody with a kid, heck, I'm 57, anybody in their 20s is a kid. So how some 25-year-old with 2 kids feeds their family. So how can we expect them to pay the cost maybe of a gigabit network connection? So I think there's a lot of factors and flexibility even in that area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great point, and it's something that people have to consider, because allowing that, or provisioning that so that people do have a good experience. My wife won't work from home because where we are, our Wi-Fi really isn't fast enough for what she needs to do. She has, she's Propel Head smart. She's one of those people like 17 different screens at work doing things that I could never conceive of. But you're right? If you don't have the ability to actually do what you need to do from home, then your company needs to help support that and provision that. And certainly I know when the pandemic started, there were many companies that did start, allocating funds and allowances for that. But yeah, that's another part of the conundrum that needs to be solved going forwards.
I think, you and I, like you said, we were chatting a little bit before we started, and one of the things we were kind of joking about, and I think it's actually an interesting topic, is, the work from home changes things. You would never, a couple of years ago, even if working from home, you always want to make sure you had quiet and you had that perfect background. And now, as I said, people that talk to me are used to a cat walking across the desk or something like that. That's just kind of normal now. We hear kids screaming and we hear the laundry going or whatever. And we've all had to make changes and adapt. And in a way, there's almost a little bit of a benefit to remote working there, because you get to know people better in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, Tracy, I think it's humanized a lot of interactions that we haven't necessarily had in the past, right? It gives you that view, right, of who somebody is outside of what they do for work, which in my mind, people always like doing business with people they like. So the more you know about somebody, what makes them tick, the better you can understand them. Recently attending conferences across the country, most people I've known well, the first question they would ask me is, how's Cora? How is my little 5-year-old doing? To be fair, she is a frequent attendee of meetings, and certainly is subject to a lot of my posts. But also from a professional perspective, my biggest driver, right, is raising her, being a dad that's present and being there for her as much as I can be. So for me personally, the era going forward, the things we've learned in the last 2 years is going to change everything I do, right? I'm not intending on traveling anywhere near the level that I wanted to. We talk about empowerment, right? Those times before, I remember on a Friday afternoon in Phoenix being called by my boss and said, hey, you have to be in New York on Monday. Well, what does that mean? That means jumping on a plane on Sunday, right? Early, because you can't get there. And I think the empowerment side now is that I would say, you know what, can't we just do this via Zoom? Do I really need to be there in person? Same with client meetings. The 9 a.m. meeting for me in Baltimore on a Monday morning is never going to happen in person, because unless there's a true benefit to being there, which I struggle to always see, then why do that? And then you look at the other implications, right, outside of just myself, but that do impact my daughter and my family going forwards. It's the environmental side of it. Is it really worth me jumping on a plane for 6 hours to attend a 1 hour meeting that I could do remotely? And I think people are more conscious of that for sure. I've talked about doing an event coming up, and somebody reached out and said, what about the environmental impact? And something that I wouldn't have thought about previously, you do think about more. And I think it's good for all of us, right? It's good for society to have that view of people as individuals, of understanding what makes them tick. And I think it certainly, from a work perspective, makes you work better and understand some of those, challenges people are facing. You probably get to the bottom of it better, why somebody's missing a deadline, if you know what their home environment is and what they're actually trying to juggle during all of this. And pre-pandemic, I think people wouldn't have spoken about those things the way they do now. So
Totally agree. It's funny you say that too, because I'm in the same boat as somebody who spent 3 to 5 days a week on a plane. And, I've had to call New York City on a project, and Friday afternoon, you're looking forward to going home for a few days. And you get the call that says, oh, by the way, there's an emergency. You're teaching capital projects for 4 days in Las Vegas next week.
right.
And then, like you said, you can't just hop and walk in Monday morning. You've got to make that call. You get home late Friday night, turn around, leave Sunday morning. Those days, I think, in many cases are over. And I certainly, while you enjoy some of the perks you gain from being a frequent traveler, I can't imagine spending 3 to 5 days a week on the road anymore. I just can't even see it. And then the value, and then you bring up the environmental side of it, and that is certainly more and more an increasing factor. And I think companies are starting to take that, and one other subject I want to bring up with you, but I think that's becoming a really big deal now. And we're seeing climate change, and we're seeing the negativity that's taken place in a lot of the things. I see it here in Florida with the sunny day flooding, they call it, down in Miami, where you have an enormous increase in seawater backing up into the streets of Miami when it's sunny outside. And this is all because the ocean levels are rising. It's a reality, and companies are starting to think about that.
Absolutely. And individuals are thinking about that in terms of who they choose to work for, right? Is some of those commitments. Yes. And I remember years ago working for a client in London, and the head of sustainability at the time, every meeting that you booked that involved a flight of more than 3 hours, has to justify it from the environmental impact before they let you book it. They'd invested in some pretty heavy duty video conferencing back then, and you had to justify, why won't this satisfy what I'm trying to do? And it's funny, I think the old guard will talk about meetings, you got to go and see the whites of their eyes. Well, from a business perspective, right, I'm much better off, we're both in the business development world. I'm much better off having a business development team that can do 4 meetings a day across a multitude of time zones from their own office, as opposed to having a flight to New York, maybe do two meetings a day, right? If you're lucky, and if your timing is right and you're rushing from one to the next. So I think even just from an efficiency standpoint, and I see it changing in other areas as well, like conferences. I love the physical aspect of being at a conference and seeing people, but from a remote perspective, I like the fact that I can jump from session to session, or indeed, as we did last year in some instances, jump from conference to conference on the same day. You would physically not be able to do that, right? And I think what we need to do collectively is look at the benefits that have risen out of this, and how those things are projected going forward, so that we do get, real value for the time that we commit and spend, and hopefully lessening time, with in front of a computer doing the work side, and more of a balance to your life. So
I think that's a good point, and something that's only been, some larger companies talked about, like wellness plans and things like that. But now even smaller companies, with COVID, the mental and physical wellness of their employees is now become something very much at the forefront. COVID has been very stressful on life in general. And it really has taken a toll in many ways, physically and mentally. And I hear a lot of conversation and part of conversations around that very subject. And I think in 2022, we're going to see a continuation and refinement of that whole thought, or from leadership around the whole thing around wellness.
yeah, I think it will probably also become a bit more systematic and trackable, right? And you can really look at the benefit from that. It was funny. I posted something the other day, and a friend of mine commented, and she said, I remember being in a meeting with a CEO, and the CEO saying, I don't want to allow people to work from home because I don't want them doing laundry on my time. The break and the reset that I mean, it takes me probably 2 minutes to walk from my office to go and throw a load of laundry in. Just that reset is beneficial, right? Just taking, as you say, just sort of a physical break from what you're doing, not thinking about something for a few minutes. It's almost like, the light bulb in the shower moment. There are some of the times when suddenly you get inspiration, or you think of something you haven't thought of. But if not, it's a reset, right? It's not just sitting there churning out time. And I think if we look at the tech side, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have is we're going to have so much information about where people are, but not enough information about what they're doing or how effective they are, right? So if you look at the world of sensors, if a sensor was over my desk and it said Simon's sat at his desk for 8 hours a day, it doesn't mean I'm necessarily being productive. I could be binge watching Squid Game. And I think from a tech side, that's one of the biggest holes that we have is, how do you correlate the data with productivity and the benefit, right? In an area where people are going to be more mindful about the time they spend in an office, how do you prove that when they are there, it is a real benefit or not?
Right.
And I think that's going to be one of the things we're going to see. This tech starting to look at some of those aspects, and to look at sort of more of the connectivity and the personal relationship. I'm intrigued. I think one of the biggest things we're going to see, post 2022, is the big players, the Salesforces, the Googles, the ServiceNows, the Microsofts coming into our space in a way they never have done before. Because I think the whole messaging, look at what Salesforce released the other day about, hybrid HQ, I think is the phrase they use. Their whole business going forwards, Slack is probably, no offense to the other companies I mentioned, but Slack is probably the preeminent tool for collaboration, and that enables a hybrid working environment in order to keep you, having valuable conversations and connectivity, working asynchronously regardless of where you are. So I think you'll see those big companies building product that is more in the workplace arena, because now they realize there is a 10x value to doing that, right? That you're going to lead from the front, and you're going to go out and sell not just Salesforce as a CRM, but Slack as a hybrid enabling communication tool. So I think we're going to see a lot of change in that respect for sure. We're still seeing a ton of money flowing in. I can't remember the latest numbers, but even this year alone, there was something between 12 and $20 billion invested in prop tech. We're seeing massive raises. Companies like Density and VergeSense, between them, just raised, I think, $185 million. So we're seeing really still unheard of investment in our space, and new players cropping up every day with new value propositions. So the tech market is interesting. It's a challenge, I think, for end users. I do this daily. I posted something this morning. I said, hey, if people can show me a really cool tech I've never seen before, I'll buy you dinner next time I'm in town. Because even though this is my job, right, to go out there and be aware of the technology that's there, I don't have enough hours in the day to commit to doing that, right? So if you're running real estate or workplace and now also having to consider HR issues and policy implications and taxation implications. How is anybody qualified enough to pick the right solution to help bring people back into the workplace? So.
And to that point too, as I have said to some people, I was talking to a group of COOs yesterday, and one of the things that I said to them was like, there's so many things out there. There's so many possible solutions that personally, I want 3 solutions to any given problem because I know there's more than one. Give me different answers because I may not know. There's 10 people in this room. You guys give me some different options and they all may be perfect solutions. Who knows? But, also to your point about travel, the physical wear and tear, mental wear and tear of going from Phoenix over to New York City for a short meeting and going back and hopping time zones and losing productivity. But it's also really hard on the human body and mind. And I think people are thinking about that. But even now, so much around even going to an office for a commute, where I live north of Tampa. If I had to work in downtown Tampa on a day without bad traffic, it would take me an hour to get to downtown Tampa. But in the morning rush hour, it'd probably take me an hour and a half. You get there, you're tired, you're stressed out already, and work hasn't even started. So there's a lot of merit to having either a hybrid or remote workforce.
Yeah, there is for sure. And, and I think we'll see more and more of that. I mean, I've been, and I think probably you as well in Florida, Tracy, we've been, let's say, relatively lucky in terms of how little we've probably been impacted relative to the rest of the world in relation to COVID. Right. I look at my friends in Australia, my friends in London, my friends in Ireland, who really truly have been locked down for a significant period of time and are probably chomping at the bit to get back into the office. And I think you might see an initial sort of, bounce back in some of those areas that is going to be in some respects false because, I've been living in an environment where, with the exception for 3 weeks, we weren't really locked down in Arizona. Right. So I've been able to actually afford and enjoy some of the benefits of having a flexible work schedule. I've been able to go out and go for a walk. Sometimes I'll take off early and I'll go and play golf, and I've enjoyed those things. Some Friday afternoons I'll pick up my daughter early and take her to the park, right? Great things. If you're in an environment where everything has been locked down for 18 months, literally everything, when they start realizing that they could replace that hour and a half commute into London or into Sydney with something more meaningful to them, whether it means going to the gym, hanging out with your friends, whatever it might mean, reading a book, anything, that I think is going to be another bounce back where people say, you know what, we should do more of this. And I think you're going to see more environments. I was doing a fireside chat with a gentleman yesterday, and before he got on, he said, yeah, I missed my window to commute because he had meetings back to back and he had an hour when he could have commuted. And of course, he stayed working at home. And I think flexibility is going to be a big drive in giving employees that choice. But we are going to be going probably for 18 months to 2 years at least of experimentation, of trying to understand data, of trying to ignore snappy headlines about bounce back of office, because it's in somebody's vested interest before we really know what is going to happen. And one of the things that we're trying to bring to the table, we've set up a separate entity called Purposeful Intent. And what that is all about is bringing together people to have meaningful conversations about what they're doing. So focused on end users talking about their experiences. We're looking at things like how do we pool data on a corporate perspective? So let's look at what 5 companies' experiences are of their hypothesis as opposed to just your own. Because I think one of the things that I've really seen up until recently is too few companies, and certainly real estate and workplace leaders, prepared to stick their head above the parapet and talk about what they're doing. So with these conversations that are more, more personal, more connected about what companies are doing on a larger level, I think we're going to learn a lot. But I think it's going to be such a continual iteration to get back to what is right for an organization. It's not going to be the same for everybody. We know that, right? It's always been the way, right? One size isn't going to fit all. But I think learning from peers, you made the comment about 3 solutions. Well, if I know what Adobe and Twitter and Genentech are doing and how it's working, then it's going to help inform me on what should I consider and try. And I think that could be really exciting if we can sort of pull off some of that data sharing to really help educate a very wide community in an area that nobody's an expert in, right? Nobody can accurately predict what's going to come next. We have ideas. We have, I think just sort of human nature views on what people do want, but we now have to go through the the slog of actually working out what works best for each entity.
So one last topic. You and I both have I think, a pretty keen interest on a topic like diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I'm curious your thoughts. I've personally seen an uptick in interest, if you will, and I'm not sure if it's related to COVID or just the maturing of business models in general. But are you seeing something like that? Do you think it's impacted by COVID, or is it just a general trend?
I mean, I think the attention on it has certainly been driven, not just by COVID, but the political landscape, globally, and certainly in the US over the last few years, and people are a lot more conscious of that than they probably ever were before. I think there were organizations that for years, Microsoft, a good friend of mine, Brian Collins, being one, that have sort of championed, how do we get better at recruiting people that might not be, like everybody else, right? How do we create environments that are better if you're on the autism spectrum, for you to be able to not only work when you get a job, but interview, right? And I think we're all probably starting to see the benefit in that. From the diversity perspective, I've always looked at it. I made a commitment about a month ago to say, I'm not going to be on any more panels, right? These panels where it's like 5 white guys talking about the same thing. I'm just not going to do it. I know plenty of people that are very different than me, that are probably, that certainly are equally, if not better, at talking about certain subjects, that I'll say, look, you should look at these people instead. And the reason for that from my side very much is because it gives you those different perspectives, right? I don't want to just talk to people that are like me when I'm trying to work something out, whatever it might be. If I'm marketing a product, if I'm, writing an invitation to an event, if I'm, writing an article, it shouldn't just be from my vision point if I want it to be effective across a bigger, wider range. So, I've always had that view of sort of surrounding yourselves with people with different backgrounds and different viewpoints is critical. And I think corporations certainly are picking up on that. And I think the trend is very key. I think the diversity side and the equity side are probably, the ones that are maybe easiest to solve. The inclusion piece is going to be the intriguing one for me. I think when you look at, you throw the hybrid world into that as well, right? And that all of a sudden could change things dramatically. It's like, okay, we have a new issue from the inclusiveness perspective of, well, if I'm not physically in a space, am I really going to have the same, interaction as somebody who is? And a lot of these things, right? The challenge is there, and the challenge needs to be met. Every time I hear challenges as to why, you should be back in the office, and the latest one being, well, how do you bring on the next generation of talent if they don't have mentors and if they're not in the office? Work out a solution. People can be mentored remotely or in a hybrid model. Again, it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? And I think these challenges need to be addressed. And I think, again, sort of the coming together collective of people talking about what they're doing organizationally is going to be big. And I think as well, if we look at those areas, we need to start considering those other aspects, right? Real estate is changing. Bricks and mortar that have built most of our careers and we've relied on is not going to be the same going forwards. And we need to recognize that now. If we want to be successful in whatever we decide to do, we need to see where is the world changing. We need to look at, sort of the tangentials. Like, it still blows my mind how long it's taken for HR to have a seat at the table from a real estate perspective. Right. Well, we will never have more visibility to, the workplace than we do now. From a HR side, from recruitment and retention side, from the CEO's perspective of what's happening in our space, what's happening with our culture. And I think, bringing together those entities is going to be critical, and also then to ensure that DEI is addressed correctly, to make sure that the people do feel that they have an equal and a fair say. So.
Thank you.
That was a deep one. I wasn't expecting at the end there, Tracy.
I know. Sorry, I kind of threw that out at the last minute, actually. But
fair.
I thought of it because I know you and I both are. I'm involved in that effort here in the Tampa Bay area, and I know that you are as well. So kind of threw that big subject out there at the last minute. But
I mean, I'll say that for anybody building a team. If your team looks like you, then you don't have a good team, right? You need to have people that think differently, that act differently, that have different experiences. You need to have people that can relate to external contacts on different levels than you can, right? I know for myself the right model of my team to meet with a client based on who the client is, and I think it's it drives a much more effective organization, and it certainly creates more discussions. It's not just a load of people nodding their heads saying, "Yep, you're right," because they think the same way as you do. So
I always said that, if I walk in a bar in Amsterdam and I hear 5 languages in 10 feet, I'm in my happy place.
yeah, absolutely. No, that's and it's true. And the more people embrace that, the better for everybody.
Well, Simon, I really appreciate your time today. It's very valuable, very interesting conversation, and best of luck. And I hope that you can continue to at least keep up with Cora on the ratings area, because I know that you're constantly having to chase her with her social media presence.
Yeah, she's outstripping me, that's for sure. She's definitely building her own little brand, a little mini influencer, which is fun to see.
All right, thank you very much. Like I said, I appreciate it, and good luck in 2022. Looking forward to seeing you.
Looking forward to seeing you in person, Tracy.
Yes.
That's definitely something. So.